Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me. What I'd like to do in the next 20 minutes is just to look at the role of leadership in promoting diversity and non-discriminating workplaces. Thank you, Kelly, for that fantastic introduction. So we've been talking about people landing at borders, and then we talked about inclusive societies. But those individuals end up in workplaces, so we have difference in our workplaces. How do we ensure that the integration that we've picked from the borders to our society translates to inclusive workplaces? Because that's where the integration has to carry on. Okay, so what I'll do in the next 20 minutes is really to look at some of the theories around diversity, inclusion, and equality, look at some critical success factors and solutions and challenges, and then move on to this notion of transformational diversity and the role of leadership in helping in this movement. And if I have time, I will give you just a few examples of some of the work that I have done to promote leadership that is good for diversity. I'd like to start by just presenting 4 terms that I use a lot. And I always say to people that to be inclusive, to be part of any society, to be integrated in the workplace, we need 4 things. We need to be significant, and our significance has to be celebrated. So we need to be part of what happens in our organizations. We need to be appreciated. So what we contribute, our contributions must count. We have to belong. We need to be valued. So our value in our workplaces is very, very important. And lastly, we need to be part of the mainstream activities in our organizations. Now, I always flip this to say, if for any reason I, Uduak Archibong, do not feel that you've given me these 4 things in the workplace, I will use power to wield these things. And then you begin to talk about notions of deviance, how people use power to wield significance, appreciation, value, and inclusion in the workplace. So all of us need this in our families, in workplaces as well. I come to you here as an embodiment of this messy diagram. That I, Uduak Archibong, I have internal dimensions. These are the physical dimensions that sometimes you see when you look at me. Now, most legislation around equality legislations in most countries in Europe, world over, tend to legislate around race, gender, ethnicity, you name it. But there are other aspects. These are the cultural points of our difference. These are things that influence the physical Uduak Archibong, that internal dimensions, and these are external dimensions. I need you to understand what my educational background, how it makes me behave, how my genetics, my family, the media, and so on influence my physical being. And this has to be coupled with organizational dimensions that make me me. So if for any reason in my interactions you insist that I show you just the physical diversity of physical dimensions, no wonder you will misunderstand me, because every now and again my life in the organization will be influenced by my marital status, it will be influenced by my parental status, and so on. So diversity is how we are all similar and different on a variety of dimensions. And I've already said that we have both physical and cultural points of difference. The problem in organizations is that we tend to just have policies that address physical difference without looking at how our thought diversity, our cultural differences influence the way we contribute in the workplace. We can never talk of true integration until we are able to look at both physical and cultural dimensions of the people that work in our workplaces. So in a nutshell, diversity is a collection of those characteristics that present differences and similarities which are applied in pursuit of our organizational objectives. Diversity management, therefore, is a way of organizing these mixtures in a way that adds value to our organizational performance. So it's about all the ways we differ, those individuality or uniqueness of individuals that we work with. Some of them are visible and some are non-visible. So for example, you can tell by looking at me that I'm a black woman, but you cannot tell what my religion is. You can guess, but I can bet that you might struggle. You cannot tell what my disability or ability status is. You don't know that. These are non-visible characteristics that you can rarely pick by just looking at me. It's about sharing and valuing the things that we bring, acknowledging and respecting and accommodating these differences that we present. So diversity is the mix. Inclusion is how you get that mix to work in our workplaces. And I really like the last plenary session because we did talk in that session about integration as more than assimilation. Integration as more than just asking people to come into organizations and fit into the way that we do things here. Two, looking at how we get our personalities, our cultural points of differences to mix well so that we can work well together. And then equality are those systems and processes that ensure that our mix can participate and has the opportunity to fulfill their potential within the workplace. But what's very important is for us to look beyond the individual differences, so looking at those structural equality, the things that help us to move beyond just being nice in the workplace. And what's so important in this, and John alluded to this, is cultural competence. You need a set of competencies and skills that allows individuals and organizations to create a truly inclusive environment that values our diversity. So I've been talking to you about three major terminologies that are really important, but underpinning this is the notion of fairness, dignity, and respect. And I want to talk again about the fact that with diversity, we're looking at how we present our differences. With inclusion, we're looking at how we respect those differences and make them to work. But the next level is actually how we allow our differences to transform our organization. And that's why I always say to people, if you stop just at diversity and inclusion, you're missing out on the value added, the ability to allow our diversity to transform our organization. So transformational diversity is about performance. It's about effectiveness. We're talking about productivity, more than some of its parts, new levels of success, and we're moving beyond current limits, and it's requiring high levels of competence. So I present to you a model that I use a lot, and it's from Bennett, developed way back in 1993, and has gone through different levels of modifications, which actually looks at us at different levels of intercultural engagement. It doesn't say that you start at denial, but there will be a point where you start at just thinking, it's about the fact that difference is not important, so I avoid it. I am colorblind. I come into this room, I don't see any difference because we're all same. That's not the fact. It's not true. And then you move on to the level where, I can see bits here and there, but my culture is the true culture. And then moving on to the point where you think differences between cultures are inconsequential. Those three levels of engaging with intercultural interaction are ethnocentric in nature. So it's about just looking at me, my own culture more important, or sometimes I don't even care about my culture, and therefore I don't care about other cultural differences. But moving into the ethno-relative stages is where we begin to accept that cultural differences exist and they are important, and should be respected and valued. Moving on to the next level, which is adaptation, where I proactively use my knowledge about cultural differences to adapt my thinking and behavior in culturally appropriate ways. And lastly, the big integration, which is about communicating and working effectively with these different groups. So I know cultural differences exist. I accept, I'm able to adapt, but above all, I'm able and confidently communicating and working with difference. So if you look at the two theoretical discourse that I've just talked through, you will see that in terms of the 2 points of difference, the physical points or dimensions of diversity and the cultural points of diversity, if you overlay that onto these 6 levels of engagement with diversity that I've just described, you will find that when I'm in denial, in defense, and minimizing cultural difference, I am just looking at the things I see. I am moved by legislative compliance. I don't really mean the diversity work that I'm doing. But when I start looking at acceptance or moving into adaptation and into integration, I'm able to bring both physical and cultural points of difference into the way I do things. Now, organizations that stick at the point of just physical points of difference are the ones who ask staff to come into work. Don't tell me about any religious festivals that you celebrate. I don't want to know your different points of views or perspectives on a matter. I just want you to come into work and leave your personality at home. And we know that even in marriages, even in any kind of relationship, if you interact with people by saying, don't be yourself, come and be like me, you're not likely to succeed. So organizations that look at cultural points of difference are those organizations that can have diversity charter. They have opportunity for staff to talk through their difference and how they bring those differences to work and enrich the workplace. So now moving on to say that demographics have changed and we're no longer dealing with homogeneous cultures in our workplaces. We're looking at multiple cultures at any one point. So traditional leadership model is no longer effective. Hierarchical corporate structures are less effective and incompatible with multiple cultures in the workplace. We are now looking at structures which requires relationship building and shared responsibility in the workplace. And this is where I'm going to take you into the next point in my slide, looking at inclusive leadership, which is the kind of leadership that helps us to build relationship and share responsibility in the workplace. So this type of leadership is denoted by quality of the interaction between people. And it's not just about having a title to be a leader. It's being a leader from every seat. So in effect, everybody in this room qualifies to lead in this way. It's not about toleration. It's about everything at the top ethno-relative parts of the awareness or the engagement that I listed. So toleration always fails. I have always known that the British society was using toleration in its diversity interactions. But I didn't realize that Brexit will expose it so strongly. Because if you're in toleration, any challenge to your diversity is really big. That's why we have so much hate that is linked to Brexit, because we've always operated in this notion of toleration. We need to be looking at genuine diversity, which is about accepting. It's about looking at what we do at individual level as well as how we work at organizational level, and it's about values-driven work. So when it all goes wrong, we end up with discrimination at personal, cultural, and structural level. And I'll just give you an example of when it goes wrong in organizations. Just to talk about an activity that we did in 2010, I was invited by a group of human resources managers in the National Health Service. National Health Service is the largest employer in Europe, third largest employer in the world, the largest employer for Black and minority ethnic staff in the UK. But one of the big things that has happened lately is that there has been disproportionality in the way disciplinary processes are used in that organization. So we found in 2010 that Black and minority ethnic staff are twice as likely to be disciplined, and the reasons are indicated on this slide. But early this year, the Royal College of Midwives found that even in London, where only 44.1% of midwives are from a Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, when you look at their disciplines, 66.4% of those that faced disciplinary proceedings between 2010 and 2015 were from a BME background. But above all, out of the 38 midwives that were dismissed, 37 of them were from a Black and minority ethnic background. And then look at the other data about a higher percentage of staff from this background reporting harassment, bullying, or abuse from staff. I use this as a reason to show that when our diversity and inclusion strategies are not working well, we end up with disproportionalities in this way. We also end up in this situation. Can you all see the cartoon where this manager cannot see qualified applicants because they are sitting on biases, sitting on prejudice, sitting on ethnocentrism, hidden racism, self-image, and denial to the extent that they cannot see anything good in other individuals except people who look like them. When it goes wrong, and it goes wrong all the time, where we have gender imbalance, we have fewer people that are non-traditional at the top of organizations. So it's quite cold up there. So I describe this as snowy peak syndrome, where it is really cold, the few non-traditional leaders up there. It's because organizations have failed in making their inclusive strategies to translate into how they recruit, to translate into how they manage disciplinaries and other policies within organizations. So what we need is inclusive leadership, which is a process that addresses organizations' infrastructures, creates an environment that enables all, and I repeat, all members of a workforce to be productive. It has two components. One is that the leader, in this case, is all of us in this room, because I did say that leadership from my work here is not looking at people with particular titles, it's about all of us as leaders. We must show our understanding of diversity by setting a tone for diversity. And then the other level is as power in the infrastructure, where we're busy working to eliminate structural inequality. So one definition I like a lot, and I use this, is that it is a style of leadership which embraces, encourages, taps into creativity and ideas which come about in non-homogeneous groups. Now, inclusive leadership has been examined by many authors. Shapiro did some work early in 2014, and when employees were asked who they defined as inclusive leader, they said that inclusive leaders are those people who would help them to increase their performance, help them to increase motivation, increase innovation and creativity, improve collaboration, and those that would help them to engage more within the organization. Now, when you look around us, there is a huge gap in inclusive leadership within organizations, because these core competencies are rare in organizations. In one of the work that I talked about earlier, 66% of staff in this organization said that there are less than 50% of leaders in the organizations that were inclusive. So I want to mention that in the 21st century, inclusive capabilities must become synonymous with excellent management and leadership. Just very quickly, a group in the US, the Inclusive leadership team have come up with a model for measuring inclusive leadership in organizations. And they insist that there are two key things in the center of inclusive leadership, which is about looking at results. So we're not talking about emotions. It's about leveraging diversity and talent in organization. An inclusive leader leads culture, leads self, and leads relationships. With these components or competencies like being authentic and open, valuing different perspectives, communicating adaptively, and so on. Let me just move on. An inclusive leader helps to lessen interference of unconscious bias in order to increase cultural competence, not just theirs, but cultural competence of those who work alongside them. The framework for change is that we need to think about the vision of setting why inclusive leadership matters to our organization and set achievable targets to get there. It's about leadership building a group of sponsors from across the organization, developing inclusive capabilities and making sure that they're integrated into core management and leadership in organizations, embedding this kind of leadership into our day-to-day process and evaluating at every opportunity, which is looking at impact and ensuring accountability. So what are the critical success factors then? One is that if we are successful, we will have established senior leaders and managers that sponsor and role model inclusive leadership. That we will build a group of change agents equipped to embed this type of leadership in our organizations. That we will position inclusive leadership as part of our overall organizational performance of change, and we will create structural equality. And I need to emphasize this point. Many of us might be thinking, when we have diversity management training, what are we trying to do? We're trying to change mindset. But there's been quite a lot of work coming out of the Harvard University, which insists that changing mindset is particularly difficult if you have organizational practices and procedures that are biased. So you need to start by debiasing organizational practices and procedures, and this could be very little things. And if I have an opportunity, I'll give you some examples of those little things. So in a nutshell, we need to start thinking about the key things within our diversity competence in organizations. What is our workplace culture? What is our market reputation? What about representation and participation? Remember the emphasis, representation and participation. So it's not just about flooding our workplaces with different kinds of people, but we need to get them to work. We need to get them to participate in leadership, in all the technical things that happen in our organizations. It's about leveraging diversity. So we've got two examples on how we've done this in Bradford. One is Genovate. Genovate is a European Commission funded multi-million project which has looked at how to transform cultures so that gender equality and gender balance would work for 7 universities, and that's a project I manage, and my colleague Nazira is also part of that project. In that project, what we've done is actually to turn things on its head and decide that there is no point trying to fix individuals, setting up an empowerment program for women or assertiveness program for guys or a springboard for men. If the structures, the systems, our policies are not right, then these individuals will not succeed. So we've spent the last 4 years just trying to work on our systems in the 7 European organizations. The next example is how we've used our in-house resources to help our leaders. So this is a program called Cultural Understanding in Leadership in Management, which I set up in 1995, and that program still carries on today, where I pair senior managers in my organizations with our diversity. So I get my Vice Chancellor, for example, paired with a Muslim woman, or get the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Academics paired with somebody from maybe a lower socioeconomic background who's got different experiences, and they learn together for a whole year. We get to the end of the program and we evaluate how that has worked. Now, this has been a fantastic program in giving my senior leaders opportunity to set the tone for diversity. I'm nearly there. So I've already talked about inequality work. We should reduce how much we keep fixing individuals, because we need to fix our systems, fix the knowledge that we use in our decision making in organizations. It's not going to be easy, because the usual business case states a set of benefits and defines the task to realize those benefits. But with diversity, you have to turn things around. In order for you to bring benefits of diversity to the enterprise, you must first examine and, if necessary, change the behaviors of leaders. And this is why all the things I've been talking about would help. We need to start intersecting diversity and inclusion to get to this transformational diversity I've talked about. Let's move away from diversity from just a transactional issue to one that is about the way we do our business. Let's move beyond legislation, because that's very minimalist. And let's look at the outcomes, measure the critical success, tap into engagement. But it's about a simple, clear message. And that message is that we're not just doing this for a small group of people, but we are doing this for the entire workforce. Thank you very much for listening.